He was a king who kept an entire country in fear. Once, while hiding from the authorities in the mountains, he burned $2 million in cash to keep his daughter warm. In the early 1990s, Pablo Escobar was in the middle of the Colombian cartel war. His empire ruled a significant part of the global criminal market for 10 years. However, in 1993, he found himself in a hopeless situation. Escobar had been ambitious and ruthless since childhood. Quickly climbing the criminal ladder, he became one of the richest people in the world. But his empire always depended on violence, and his path to the top was bloodstained. One of Pablo's main goals was to achieve the adoption of a new constitution that would rule out the extradition of citizens to the United States. Extradition was a major threat to him. American authorities demanding his extradition intended to prosecute him for numerous crimes, including smuggling, money laundering, and contract killings. For Escobar, the prospect of being extradited to the United States meant an inevitable lifetime imprisonment and the end of his empire. Escobar used his financial and political resources to resist extradition in every possible way. In a desperate attempt to strengthen his position, in 1984, he offered to repay all of Colombia's national debt, about $10 billion, in exchange for an end to his persecution. However, the Colombian government rejected the offer. In 1989, his team organized an assassination attempt on the future president. A bomb exploded on board the Avianca plane where Cesar Gaviria was supposed to be. All 107 people on board were killed. The terrorist attack caused international outrage and only increased pressure on the Colombian government. In response, the government began a large-scale campaign to eliminate criminal organizations, mobilizing police, military forces, and even American intelligence agencies. Escobar's internal problems were escalating as well. His closest allies began to turn their backs on him. The cartels became highly competitive, and his family became threatened. Meanwhile, the government was deliberately destroying the infrastructure of his business, seizing laboratories, confiscating money, and arresting his key cronies. A brutal war was raging in Colombia. The government, with the support of the United States, waged a relentless battle against the cartels. Escobar, facing pressure from all sides, tried to retain his power, but the government strengthened its position. The king of a huge cartel, one of the most powerful criminals in the world, was under severe pressure. His business was suffering heavy losses due to police raids. But extradition to the United States remained the biggest threat. The adoption of a new constitution in 1991 changed everything. Now, extradition of Colombian citizens to other countries was forbidden. This was Escobar's long-awaited opportunity. He offered a deal: voluntary surrender to authorities in exchange for guarantees that he would not be extradited to the United States. Escobar realized that this was his only chance to avoid a lifetime imprisonment in the United States and retain control of the cartel. Pablo Escobar officially surrendered to Colombian authorities, but the conditions of his imprisonment were unique. He was sent to the specially built prison La Catedral, located in a picturesque area on the outskirts of Medellin. Escobar personally supervised the construction of La Catedral to ensure it met his requirements. It featured luxury apartments, a private gym, a soccer field, and a bar. Escobar lived in comfort, surrounded by his team and servants. When the conditions of Pablo Escobar's imprisonment were revealed to the public, it caused a storm of outrage throughout Colombia. It looked like a mockery of justice and a symbol of the total powerlessness of the state over drug lords. At first glance, such a decision looked like a compromise beneficial to all parties. Escobar avoided extradition, and the Colombian government could claim his arrest as a victory in the fight against criminal organizations. But it was not a victory. Pablo continued to run his cartel from prison. He maintained contact with the outside world through trusted people, continued to control cash flows, and made key decisions to grow the business. For him, the prison was not a punishment, but rather a comfortable refuge from the outside world, where he could enjoy comfort and security. However, his decision to surrender was not without consequences. Disagreements began to escalate within the cartel. Many of his partners felt betrayed and feared that such a decision would undermine their reputation. Leaders of other cartels saw this as an opportunity to strengthen their positions, and powerful members began to question whether Pablo would be able to effectively run his business while in prison. Escobar's family was also affected by the decision. Although he managed to keep them relatively safe, government forces and enemies continued to pressure them. His wife and children were under constant threat of attack or arrest. Escobar himself realized that his family had become vulnerable. The USA demanded that Colombia toughen measures against Escobar, threatening to cut financial and military aid. American diplomats openly called this agreement a capitulation to a drug trafficker. But everything changed in 1992, when Pablo decided to escape. Escobar's escape from prison was the culmination of his confrontation with the state. The Colombian government, under the pressure of the United States and public outrage, began to change the conditions of his imprisonment. After a year, it became clear that La Catedral was more of a luxury residence than a place of imprisonment. Orders to eliminate rivals continued to come from there, and Escobar's influence persisted, even though it had weakened. Eventually, the Colombian government decided that this situation was unacceptable. The idea of transferring Pablo to a more secure prison that would limit his possibilities arose. Pablo Escobar found out about the government's plans. This was a serious threat to him. He realized that once in a real prison, he would lose control of his business and become vulnerable to his enemies. Escobar decided to escape, realizing he could no longer trust the government. He quickly began to develop an escape plan, relying on his personal security staff and bribed guards. He prepared escape routes and communications in advance in case of emergency. His closest cronies supported the plan, realizing that if their leader went to a real prison, the Medellin cartel's empire could collapse. On a night when the government forces were preparing for the transfer, Escobar acted quickly, in cold blood. With minimal effort, he overcame all security measures and escaped. It was a demonstration of how weak the measures to control him were. The Colombian government found itself in a humiliating position. Their most notorious arrest resulted in an escape, and the United States increased pressure, demanding Pablo's immediate capture. Competing cartels began actively working against him, making tacit deals with the Americans. They provided information about his location and movements. Pablo was the subject of an international manhunt involving both the Colombian armed forces and American intelligence services. This made Escobar's life very difficult, as he could no longer rely on his former power and influence. After escaping, Pablo tried to find a safe refuge for himself and his family. One of his main targets was Germany. This decision was not accidental. Escobar expected that a European country could give him political asylum. He hoped that Germany, known for its bureaucracy and legal protection for refugees, could protect him from extradition. But German authorities turned him down. This rejection symbolized the collapse of Escobar's international influence. His family was in an extremely dangerous situation. His wife and children were forced to go into hiding, traveling from one country to another under constant threat of attack or arrest. Numerous attempts to protect his family through bribery of officials failed. His family became his vulnerability, and his enemies quickly realized this. After escaping, Escobar began hiding in various hiding places in Medellin. He hid in houses, constantly changing locations. He was hunted by both Colombian troops and American agents. Escobar now lived as a fugitive, constantly in fear and tension. His life had changed dramatically. There were no more luxurious palaces or guards. Now, he was surrounded only by a couple of loyal people, ready to go to the end. Escaping from prison was the beginning of Escobar's downfall. With each passing week, he was losing control of his empire, and his enemies were increasing the pressure. His competitors, taking advantage of American support, strengthened their positions, and the Medellin cartel gradually weakened. Escobar found himself alone, without reliable allies, and under threat of imminent arrest. One year has passed. Pablo Escobar celebrated his 44th birthday. But this time, it was not a celebration, but a day full of loneliness and despair. Since he escaped from prison, his life has changed dramatically. Escobar stayed on the outskirts of Medellin, in one of his last hideouts, hidden among the tangled streets. A simple dwelling lacking amenities became his temporary shelter. Pablo was running low on resources, so he was on the verge of both physical and emotional exhaustion. His precious family was under strict surveillance by Colombian authorities and American intelligence agencies. It was deadly to have any contact with them. Nevertheless, for Pablo, family was always a top priority. Do you remember that he burned millions of dollars to keep his daughter warm? Even now, risking his life, he looked for ways to contact them. In the morning, Pablo woke up with anxiety. Sleep was shallow, and every rustle or sound outside the window made him nervous, thinking he was about to be found. The hunt for him had intensified over the past few months, with the authorities targeting anyone connected to Escobar in any way. The CIA had actively joined the operation, intensifying surveillance of any communications, especially phone calls that could lead to him. During the first half of the day, Pablo was busy moving between his hideouts as usual. He avoided using vehicles so as not to attract attention. By 11 o'clock, Pablo entered one of his hideouts where he planned to call his family. On his birthday, Escobar had an urgent desire to hear the voices of his loved ones. Pablo picked up the phone. He knew the line could be tapped, but the desire to hear the children's voices made him take the risk. When Pablo made the call, he spoke quietly avoiding long conversations and using code words. Escobar could barely contain his emotions. He asked about the children and tried to be supportive, despite the tension in his voice. Every second seemed infinitely long to him, but the conversation only lasted 2 minutes. After the call, Escobar was in silence again. This moment was especially painful for him. He realized he would not be able to see his family and be with them on his birthday. Intelligence agencies obtained information about Pablo's call. The interception of the line confirmed that Escobar was still hiding in Medellin. Colombian armed forces and American agents immediately began to intensify the operation to find him, pulling troops into the city. However, they still had no exact location. By this time, Escobar was in extreme tension. He realized they were actively tracking him today, and at about 5 o'clock in the evening, he decided to move to a new hiding place. Every time Pablo moved around the city, he risked being spotted, but staying in one place was even more dangerous. Pablo Escobar wanted to call his family again. He wanted to convince his family to leave Colombia and start a new life in another country. It was the only chance for him to save them. However, Pablo himself could not leave Medellin. He realized he could find refuge abroad, but his pride and sense of belonging to his hometown did not allow him to leave his homeland. When Escobar made the call, the signal was intercepted by police. The quick response team immediately began the process of tracing the signal. The operation was done very cautiously. It was critical not only to pinpoint Escobar's exact location, but also not to let him escape. Over the next hours, Colombian military detachments prepared for the decisive raid. At the same time, American agents were transmitting data on an outgoing call. The intelligence services tried to avoid information leaks, as Pablo still had allies who could warn him of the impending threat. At this point, Escobar had no idea that the police were already around. Pablo's inner circle consisted of several bodyguards he had known for years. At 11 a.m., he tried to call his family again. That very call was the fatal one. At that moment, Pablo was alone. His voice trembled as he called to his children. Perhaps for the first time in his life, he felt not like a king, but just a father who could not protect his family. The conversation took about 5 minutes, and that was enough for the intelligence services to trace the signal and localize the building he was in. The signal was coming from a small house. The city he knew was now his enemy. The Colombian troops headed to the designated location. It was 30 minutes until the end. The operation has begun. Colombian troops and special forces began to surround the house. They moved closer and closer to block any escape routes. Escobar, hearing some movement outside, realized that he had been found. So he quickly took his weapon and, with the only remaining bodyguard, went up to the second floor. 10 minutes to the first shot. He already knew it was the end, but he wasn't willing to give up. The SWAT team broke into the house. Then Escobar and his bodyguard climbed out onto the roof, hoping to escape through the neighboring buildings. However, the soldiers were prepared, and a firefight started between them. Escobar and his bodyguard kept running and desperately resisted. The shooting lasted for several minutes. While trying to jump to a neighboring roof, a shot rang out. Pablo was shot in the back. Soon, another shot rang out, this time in his head. Pablo Escobar was killed. The Colombian police and American intelligence services announced the successful outcome of the operation. This was the end of the Pablo Escobar era. Thank you for watching this video. Do you think Escobar could have avoided his fate if he had made different decisions? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to know your opinion. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, and share this video with your friends. It will help us to grow our channel. See you in the next video.